Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, in this series of discussions, we are going to consider and analyze and try and understand some of the teachings of Jesus Christ, especially some of his truth claims and also some of the theological insights of Jesus need be understood and grasped from the perspective of Jesus himself. Now, this factor is utterly crucial. Of course, as humans, as human beings, we also attempt to understand his teachings from our own perspectives, from our own experiences. There is nothing wrong with that process, apparently. But as we mature, as we grow spiritually, it is very important for all of us to try and understand his teachings from his own perspective, from his own mind, or from his own eyes. Because when it comes to the teachings of Jesus, Jesus himself is the best interpreter. In fact, when it comes to certain parables, he communicated the parable, first of all, and then he himself came up with the interpretation or the explanation. There are such instances in the Gospels. Now, in this series of discussion also, we are attempting to do the same thing, because Jesus' perspective is the most accurate perspective about his own teaching. It's the most profound perspective. It is the deepest perspective, and it is the most authentic perspective about his own teaching. So it will be very beneficial for all of us if we try to somehow self-appropriate the perspective of Jesus. In other words, as disciples of Christ, as we go through life, as we mature, as we experience a lot of struggles and a lot of frustrations and also unexpected things in life, we need to try to reach up to the mind of Christ or up to his spiritual maturity. Then some of his teachings begin to make really better sense. Some of his teachings begin to make deep sense to us. So that is our attempt. Now, there is another factor we need to clarify first of all. Some of his teachings, actually this is true for all biblical teachings, at times look very paradoxical to us. Some of his teachings and some of the teachings in the Bible, whole Bible, this is true for the Old Testament as well as for the New Testament, they look very contradictory or contrary. Or the best term is paradoxical, as if both cannot be true at the same time. Of course, to our, limited mind and our limited and narrow perspective, those teachings look like that. It's natural. But if we explore these teachings and if we try to understand and interpret from the perspective of Jesus or from the perspective of the Bible, they begin to make better sense. I will consider few examples. Examples for these paradoxical teachings or paradoxical or contradictory insights. First of all, let us go to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 8. So Matthew 6:8, in it Jesus says like this, Your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Let me repeat it again. Your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Now, most people come to the conclusion when they read this passage, we don't need to ask anything from God. Anyway, He knows even before we ask of Him anything. Therefore, there is no need to really elaborate when we pray about our needs. You see, that's one interpretation. Let's see what Jesus says about asking for things. Let us go to now the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 7. Jesus says like this, "Ask whatever you will, and it shall be done for you." Ask whatever you will, and it shall be done for you. While ago we read, Jesus is saying, even before you ask anything, God knows it. And here He is saying, ask whatever you want, or whatever you desire, or whatever you wish, and it will be done for you, or it will be granted to you. Now, as I mentioned earlier also, these two teachings look apparently contradictory or paradoxical. But are they really so? Now, actually there is no contradiction between these two teachings. It's true, since God knows everything, since God is omniscient, even before we ask of something, God knows it. But it does not mean we should not ask, or we need not ask for anything. We need to ask, then only we can appreciate whatever we will receive. Because if we do not have a necessary and inner disposition to receive something, even if we receive it without, let's say, inner preparation, or without our mind somehow, and also our desire, making our desire stronger, when we get something from God, we would not be appreciating it. People would take things for granted. If God gives us things without asking, thing is, people take the things for granted. Not only things, but also people will take God for granted. So if we ask and pray and then desire, so there is an inner preparation for that. So we have a really, really deep desire then, deep drive and enthusiasm to receive it. Then only we could do justice to whatever we are going to receive. Because I had been desiring it, because I had been willing it, I had been wishing it, and I had been, very importantly, praying for it. Then I could truly do justice to what I am going to receive, or what I would be receiving. So both teachings are true at the same time. That's the meaning of a paradox. Apparently, at a glance, we cannot understand how they could become true. But deep, when you consider the deeper meaning, the inner meaning of these two teachings, they are true at the same time. God knows what we need. At the same time, we need to ask. Then there will be complementarity. Not only that, then it will be very easy for us to cooperate with God, because we have the necessary interior disposition. Therefore, we should not think like this. We should not think, when it comes to such teachings, one teaching is right, the other teaching is wrong. Or most people tend to think, both cannot be right at the same time. One of them must be or should be wrong. Actually, that's a wrong concept. Both are true at the same time in a deeper manner. Once we grow spiritually and once we struggle with such teachings, then we see the light. Not only that, as a result of struggling with a paradox, we also become spiritually mature. then we know God's ways are very different from human ways. God works in a very different manner. With us humans, sometimes our perspective about life and about the world is very narrow. It's either black or white. It's either this is true or this must be true. You see, that's the problem with humans. God has no such problems. His perspective or his vision is very profound, very deep. Therefore, he could handle these so-called apparent contradictions. They are not actually contradictions in God. They may look like contradictions for us humans who have very narrow perspectives about life, or who could be deprived of true wisdom. So we need to keep that in our mind. That's why we need to look at the reality from the perspective of God, from the perspective of Christ, the way God looks at things, or the way God communicates himself and his truths to us. Now, let us take another example about these so-called apparent contradictions. Let us go to the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verse 30. In it, Christ says like this, 5:30, I can do nothing on my own authority. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. Here, Christ is clearly talking about judging, about a judgment. As I hear, I judge. And if you go to chapter 8 of the Gospel of John, 8:15 to 16, he says something very different from what he just uttered while ago. John 8:15, 16, Christ says, you judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Oh, I do not judge anyone. While ago he said, as I hear, I judge. Here he is saying, I do not judge. And again he says, even if I do judge, my judgment is true. For it is not I alone that judge, but I and he who sent me. Now again, most people get puzzled and confused about this teaching. In one place he says he judges as he hears and his judgment is correct. And another place he's saying, I judge no one. I do not make any judgment. Which is which? Which must be right and which must be wrong? Both are right at the same time. The way Christ judges things is different from the way humans judge something. Usually we judge according to our prejudices, prejudgments, and some of our biases. And also we judge based on our self-interest. If something is beneficial to me, or if something is beneficial to us, if something is self-serving, we tend to judge it as something good. And we would become favorable to it because we are benefiting from that. If something is critical of us, if something is challenging us, and if something is not self-serving, we tend to judge it as negative, or we may not like it, we tend to reject it. But the way Christ judges is very different. His judgment is always based on the truth about things. That's why he said famously, as we know, I am the way and the truth and the life. So when he judges something, it is based on truth. Therefore, his judgments are absolutely accurate. His judgments will not create any injustice to anyone. So there is no favoritism, there is no bias in his judgment. So Christ's judgment is very different, and his judgment is the accurate judgment. Therefore, it's good for everyone. For an example, if Christ says something about me, if he tells me something about my character or my behavioral patterns, it's true. And therefore, even though it may hurt me, I may not like it, I may not want to accept it, but if I accept it, I will truly grow. It will be very beneficial to my own life because he is telling the truth about my character or my behavioral patterns or about my sinful nature. So both are right at the same time. Yes, Christ judges and also Christ does not judge. Not according to human standards. Not according to flesh means not the way humans judge. Our judgments are most of the time narrow and inaccurate and inadequate and sometimes based on our personal experiences and prejudices and biases and prejudgments and everything and presumptions. So you see, this paradox we need to hold always. Christ judges, but according to his standards, according to divine standards, and his judgments are absolutely accurate because they are based on the truth about things, truth about us. So therefore, both of them are true at the same time. So I will give another example about this paradoxical nature of his teachings. And in one place, for an example, John 8:11, if you remember the woman who was caught in the act of adultery. Finally, he told that woman like this, and he said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and do not sin again." Very clear. The teaching is very clear. Do not sin again. Sin no more. Also, John 5:14. Let's read from 5:14, right? To the man who was paralyzed. This incident happened in Jerusalem. And when Christ met him again, he told that man who was paralyzed, "See, you are well," after he underwent healing. "Sin no more, that nothing worse befall you." Very clearly saying, don't sin again. Nothing worse will or nothing worse would happen to you. So very clear the teaching, do not sin again. Stop the life of sinning. But in the biblical revelation, the idea is humans as sinners. Let us go to the book of 1 Kings, chapter 8:46. I will read. "For there is no man or no one who does not sin." There is no man or no one who does not sin. So if it is the case, if it is our tendencies to sin, there is no point in telling people not to sin. Anyway, we are all sinners. We have this intrinsic bent for sins. Therefore, why mention about not sinning? Now, so it's again a paradox, an apparent contradiction. Now, what we need to understand in the whole biblical revelation, even though people continue to sin, humans continue to sin, sin is something unnatural to us. Sin is not something natural to us. It's not the way God created us. He created us with his own image and the likeness. So that means God has given us a greater capacity. Something of himself he has given us. Bit of his creativity, his capacity to love, his capacity to forgive, his capacity to understand people, and also a bit of divine wisdom, divine intelligence, and also the capacity to understand things, capacity to analyze things, capacity for freedom and making choices, etc. So all those things are part of God's image in us. So therefore, God has given us something big, something great, a portion of himself, a spark of the divine, we have it. So if we become conscious of that part, that divinity within us, that divine image within us, that divine likeness within us, we could resist sins. That is why Christ told people, do not sin anymore. That means we have the capacity to resist sin. In him, with his grace, with his help, we do have the capacity. We must never underestimate ourselves. If one says, well, I don't think I will ever be able to overcome sins, or I don't think I will ever be able to get rid of my sinful tendencies, he or she has underestimated himself. He or she is not doing justice to one's life. As humans, we have that divine capacity to resist sin mightily and to come out and to emerge triumphantly. Therefore, since we have the image and the likeness of God, we must never underestimate our spiritual capacity. That's what Jesus is telling people. Especially he was telling that to sinners. Even though you had been sinning so far until this point, you could change your life. You could stop sinning and then begin a new life, a new existence. Each one of us is capable of that. Therefore, there is no inherent contradiction between the teaching, there is no one who has not sinned, and also the teaching, do not sin. Do not give in to temptation. You are capable of living a holy life. So they are true at the same time. If not, the danger is some people might use their sinful tendencies as an excuse to sin and sin and sin. You see, you have a nice excuse then. You would say, well, what could we do? We are sinners by nature. Therefore, you can't expect me to give up this life of sins. You see, then it becomes a dangerous teaching. Not only that, Christianity becomes very dangerous. Then Christianity has become or the biblical revelation has become a means of justifying any crime. So you could kill someone and you will say, well, what could you do? I'm a sinner. It's also in the Bible. We are sinners. Therefore, you should not expect me to live a good life or a sinless life. That will be very dangerous. Then Christianity becomes a religion suitable for mafia members and then the thugs and the murderers and the rapists. So the meaning of that teaching is not to perpetuate sins or to continue our sinful patterns. That truth, we need to become aware about that truth so that we could overcome sin. We could resist mightily and strongly against the sin. In fact, that teaching was at the very beginning also when Cain and Abel had that conflict. When Cain killed Abel, before he killed Abel, God warned him. God said, sin is couching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you could master it or you must master it. You see, this is even before Christ came. So even before Christ came, we had the capacity to resist sin. Why? Because we had the image and the likeness of God. He gave it unto us from the very beginning. Therefore, there is no excuse for sins. There is no excuse for our sinful patterns and sinful behavioral tendencies. In God, since we have His image and the likeness, and since we have Christ with us now, we are capable of resisting sins. So that's why Christ told us not to sin. Sin no more. So nothing worse will befall you or happen to you. So there is no contradiction between those two teachings also. So the best approach, as I said, in order to understand Christ's teachings is to understand his teachings through these paradoxes, and to somehow see the connection between these two apparent contradictions, and to see the integrity and the harmony. Then we become deep and profound, and then we grow spiritually, because then we see his teaching from different perspectives, not only from one perspective, or especially from our own narrow perspectives, but from different perspectives. Then you acquire a broader viewpoint, a panoramic viewpoint about Christ's teaching. So that is the way forward for all of us. This is an invitation for all of you to enter into that marvelous adventure, that marvelous spiritual journey. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all.